Hello, we're in England and we're going through a variety of items today. This is a Italian-made decorative vase, and I would say it was made in 1975 to 1980. That's just my guess. I know it's Italian because it says so, and the mark is a transfer mark. Now, the thing about these pots is they are becoming desirable because they are of the time, they're striking, they're fashionable, as I say. But what you've got to be aware of is the Chinese copies are visually the same. So you have to decide whether you want to buy a real one or whether you want to buy a Chinese one, which looks the same, but it is a counterfeit. It's like buying a good handbag from Christian Dior or a Chinese handbag from Christian Dior. It's the same choice you have to make. Do you want Ray-Ban sunglasses for £300, or do you want sunglasses from the market for £3? So it's the same thing, and the choices are the same with pictures and prints and other types of antique furniture, reproduction, genuine period furniture. So the same is now the case for these vases, and the bigger the better. And that's the same for modern, new shop bought vases or antique vases. The bigger the better. They're worth more money, the more useful, the more striking. So I bought this vase when my father started dealing in antiques in the 60s. This hadn't been made. So you have this situation where every generation you have new stock coming in at one end, and then the other end you have stuff that would have been familiar to a dealer in the 60s, which you don't see so much. So you don't see so much 18th century Chinese pottery at the moment. But my father had mountains of it. It was sold in crates. It would be wrapped up. Well, sorry, it wouldn't be wrapped up. There was so much of it. He would, in the early days, there'd be so much Chinese pottery that it was bought at a sale room and we'd put in a box without wrapping it up. And if some of it got broken, it just got broken. And that's the situation. So we have this stuff here, and it's only really in the first 10 or 20 years of its period when it's been noticed. So I bought this vase and I like it hugely. It's a nice shape. It's a lovely colour, and I think that the value of this will climb. What I want to talk about is how it's made. And people say, oh, it's made on a pot, like in the film Ghost, and someone's laboriously making this thing, and then it's painted by somebody else with the glaze, and then it's fired, and all the rest of it. It's complete, utter tosh. These things are not made by hand. These are made by machine with the help of technicians. So I'll tell you how they made it. You can't have a mould with two parts. You can't pull out the other inner part because of the shape. So you have to get over that in your head. What you've got to understand is this is made with liquefied pottery. So there was a plaster cast made of the shape, two halves, and it would have been pushed together with a hole only in the top. Larger items, more elaborate items, might have had a bottom hole and a top hole. I think this one here would not have had a bottom hole. So the cast with two halves put together. Usually the join is flat. You will find with people like Ledro, when they're making horses, that the moulds will be really, really complex. But this is, I think, just a simple mould running that way. And the factory, made in a factory, it's not made in an artist's studio, making 6 pieces a week. You know, they're making this like they're making bricks in a factory. You know, that they want to make as much as they can. So they pour in this liquefied slurry, and in this case, they will have filled the mould to the top, and they would have left it. And I think that in 10 minutes, they would have come back to the mould. They'd have it timed, they'd know the time, and they'd turn upside down and they'd leave it. And the slip that hadn't adhered and set on the plaster would drain away. And you will see, if you look at if you go to a garden centre and look at the way they make the pots in garden centres, the big Chinese pots, you'll notice in the bottom of the containers you have drips coming up, because when they drain out the slip, it leaves drips going down. So if you start looking inside them, you'll see what I'm talking about. So that was then drained, And on this occasion, because the pottery is biscuit coloured, whitish, it's not porcelain, but it's a creamy pottery, what they've done is they've glazed it separately, and that glazing will have been done by putting in a tank, leaving it, shaking it, lifting it up, letting it drain. And there's a lot of glaze on it, and it's a pleasing glaze. Red glaze traditionally is difficult because it has lead in it, and for many years it was illegal in England. I'm thinking until about 1990, it was illegal to sell red pottery for dinnerware unless the interior was white. Cadmium was in the glaze. So that's just a factoid. So that was then wiped here with a sponge to show, let the pottery show through. There's no reason for that at all, other than the fact it's a traditional thing. And you'll see, if you buy a Japanese pot or a Chinese pot, I haven't got one at hand, you'll nearly always see that there. So there's a lot more to these pots than just the way they look. There's things about how they're made, who made them, and so on. So I think the way it's made is really interesting, and I think it performs a very high part of the value. If this had been made by a potter on a wheel, it would have to be made in 3 sections, and then you're into a different craft, and you're into a different skill, and then you have the implication of that is you have a different value. And for craftsmen to make 2 the same is extremely difficult, near on impossible. You can make 2, of course you can. There are differences in sizes, and when I buy my Chinese vases, antique Chinese vases, if they're the same, usually they're made in a cast. If they're different, slightly different, you can't see it optically. If they're slightly different, they're made by hand, usually. So these are things to look for. Thank you.